We're going to start calling you out if you don't move. Carla Mitchell, she's never been this close to the front in her life. Some of y'all's never seen the church from this point of view. Who? Do I? Yeah. Might get spit on. Yeah. Who all in here, this is the first time you've been this close to the front? Anybody? Bill and Carla. Yeah. Well, it's good to see you here tonight. I'm glad you come. We have a special guest tonight, Shad Black. He is a missionary at Senegal. Yes, he'll explain more about that here in a moment. But I'm glad he's here to speak to us and share about his ministry. But we're going to open up with some announcements. Do we have any announcements? Anybody we need to mention or talk about? Yes. Oh, yeah, come here. You got to do that. Barbara Ann's got something to share. This is about Melissa Coffels having her surgery Friday, and be in prayer for her, and she's going to explain more about that.
Okay, we're going to start, or we have started, a prayer chain for her family and her. They're leaving tomorrow. So we're starting the prayer chain at 5 a.m. So you will have, when you sign up for it, you're signing up for an hour of praying, just consistent praying for her. And we're going until midnight, Friday night. And then if something changes and she needs us to continue this prayer chain, then we will, which of course we'll continue praying for them. But we just wanted to do something extra. And the women's group is just talking about doing this for different ones who need. So I'm going to pass this around, and y'all can sign up. Don't feel like you have to. But if you sign up, just make sure that you remember your hour. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Barbara Ann. So be sure and sign up for that. Also, Kathy Proctor's husband, Alan, he's in the, I think he's in the ICU or he's in the emergency room, one of the two right now. He's having another heart cath tomorrow. He had one day or two ago, but something's going on with him, so they're going to do another one. So remember him. Sign-up sheet back here in the back. Please sign up for the chili cook-off this Sunday night coming up. You don't have to sign up your chili to be judged, but if you want to, sign up in the back, and we would appreciate that. We're going to have a good time. It's our 5th Sunday singing. We're going to be singing Sunday night as well, starting at 5 o'clock. And so if you want to bring soup or chili, be sure and do that. And sign up for the Valentine's Banquet. It's back there in the back as well. Any other announcements before we? Tomorrow from 1 to 3. If you want to help give out food from 1 to 3, be up here and help Miss Ruth and all of us out. I guess the ones that will be here. Yeah.
I just want to remind everybody about the policies and procedures in the back. The stack still looks about as big as it did Sunday.
Yeah.
So please pick those up and read through those changes so that you're aware of what's going on, because next business meeting we will be voting on those.
Yeah, March the 1st is the next business meeting, and the revised changes that will be voted on is back there in a stack. You can read over that and see what has been change that will be voted on in March. Anything else? All right, I'm going to turn this over to Terry and let Terry introduce Shad.
Well, a few weeks ago, Diane and I went to Smithville and was in a service there at the dedication of a new church building. And one of the professors from Williams Baptist College was there, and in talking with him, I had asked him if there was any young pastors might want to speak somewhere, or any missionaries home on furlough, because Marty and I had been talking, and he was looking for folks to come on Wednesday night, and he mentioned Brother Shad, and I guess you really stuck out in his mind. You have really indelibly made a mark on him somehow or another. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but one way or the other. And he immediately said, well, I know Shadrach is home on furlough from Senegal. And he said he would be a good guy for you to ask if he wanted to come and speak. So I found out he was in Cabot, Arkansas. And so he's driven up here today. He's got some friends around town here too. He used to be the youth pastor at Westview Baptist Church. What years was that?
We left in 2005.
Okay, he was.
So it would have been leading up to 2005.
All right. So anyway, talking with him on the phone and talking with him this evening. This is the first time I've met him today personally, but he has a lot to share about the mission field. Now, one of the reasons why we wanted a missionary to come is because we support the Southern Baptist missionaries from our church, and very seldom do any of us get to meet them. And this is a good opportunity for us to meet a real live missionary who's been on the field, and how he can share with us how all of that works. He's gonna do a little devotional because he said he'd like to do that, and then he's gonna take questions from all of us here. Any question that you have about our part in supporting missions and how all of that works, I wish you would ask it, because it'll give you a better idea of how to pray for our missionaries, how God might lead you to support missions. Any question like that you want to ask will be fine. And then, this is, all of this coming about is not by chance. I believe God is a providential God. And so this is a providential meeting maybe for us as a church family. Maybe we can have a little contact with them while he's going back to the mission field this coming year. And so maybe we'll have a personal contact where we can pray for them in certain things that's going on the mission field there in Senegal. Might even lead to any one of us going on a little short-term mission trip to that area. So be thinking about that and praying about that, and ask any question that you'd like to ask at when he gives you an opportunity in a few moments. Okay? All right, I'll turn this over to Chad.
All right. Thanks, Brother Tommy. Like Brother Tommy said, I do want to share a short devotional with you. Terry? Did I say Tommy? Yep. Terry. Sorry. Yep. Sorry.
We just met.
Want to share a short devotional with you. Just an idea of what God's been doing in my life. Right? And I didn't necessarily mean for it to be this way, but sometimes it's easy to get this idea that you reach certain levels in your spiritual life where God's not going to teach you much more. And I don't think any of us want to be there on purpose. But sometimes we get to that idea of, okay, God, like I've grown a lot, and now we're just going to kind of coast that out. And towards missionaries even, sometimes there's this idea that missionaries are like a pinnacle of Christian life. And the truth of it is, like, most of us are just trying to be obedient. It's not necessarily that we have arrived at some special level, or you have to get to some special level of Christian faith before God would send you out. Instead, each of us should be striving to be obedient to whatever calling God has put on our lives. And that's the way it was with us. I mean, my wife and I were just dumb kids. When we got sent out in 2005, from Westview Baptist Church, and hi, Miss Diane. Just dumb kids. Didn't even know what all was going to happen, but God transformed us and helped us grow into people that recognize we still need to be growing. And one of the places I've been reading lately is in Mark 12. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Mark 12. Phones are acceptable, I guess, if you have to. In the beginning of Mark 12, Jesus is telling a story. I'm going to read this for you. It says, Jesus began to speak to the people in parables. A man planted a vineyard and put a fence around it, and dug a vat under the winepress and built a tower, and then he leased it out to vine growers and went on a journey. And at the harvest time, he sent a slave to the vine growers in order to receive his share of the produce of the vineyard from the vine growers. Well, the vine growers took that slave and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. So the owner sent another slave. And the vine growers wounded him in the head and treated him shamefully. And so the owner sent another, and that one they killed. And he sent many others. They beat some and killed others. He had one more man to send, a beloved son, and he sent them to them last of all, saying, "They will respect my son." But those vine growers said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and then the inheritance will be ours." And they took the son and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. What will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and put the vine growers to death and give the vineyard to others. Have you not read this scripture? A stone which the builders rejected, this has become the chief cornerstone. This came about from the Lord, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And the religious leaders were seeking to seize Jesus, and yet they feared the people, for they understood that Jesus had told the parable against them. And so they left Jesus and went away. You may be familiar with this passage, as I've been reading it multiple times over the past week even, not sure exactly all why God has me staying in this same place over and over again. But as I've read this over the last couple of weeks, a couple of thoughts popped into my head. First off, like, that owner, that landowner, what a foolish man. Right? Like, what happened? He sent a slave, what happened to him? They beat him up. And so he said, okay, well, surely that was just like a one-off, so I'll send another one. And what happened to that guy? Got wounded in the head, treated shamefully, and cast out. And he goes, okay, never mind. Like, I'll send a third, right? Because, like, what's that whole definition of insanity? Expecting a different result, right? And so he goes, okay, I'll send another one. So he sent another, and what happened to that guy? They killed him. And it says, and so with many others. Like, we jump over that he's sending multiple servants to be treated the same way over and over and over again. And after multiple servants have been treated this way, the landowner says, I know what? I'll send my son. Foolish man. Another thought was poor servants. Right? They knew what was going to happen, right? Like the same thing keeps happening. All right, who wants to go next? You knew what happened to the three guys before you. Who's signing up for the next to go? And as I'm reacting emotionally to this story, which I don't know that we do that a lot, maybe you guys dive into the stories more deeply than I do sometimes, but I think a lot of times I just read over things and just go, okay, that's nice, and then just continue on in the reading. I think that's why sometimes God has to slow me down a bit and have me stay in a place a little longer just to let me really digest what's going on. So I dove a little deeper into that passage and kept reading it multiple times. Like, okay, God, okay, why am I still reading this? There's lots more Bible to read. Why am I still reading this? And as I began to react a little more emotionally to this story, I remembered, who is it that we're talking about? Because Jesus is telling this parable. Who's the landowner? God. So my reaction to go, foolish landowner, foolish God. I go, okay, wait, how can I think that, right? How can I say foolish God? Who are the servants that were being sent? The prophets, primarily. Now, this is Jesus talking to religious leaders of the day, and he's looking back on the prophets. Foolish God for sending prophet after prophet after prophet to his people, but who would reject him, who would kill the prophets, who would treat them shamefully. Foolish God, who would allow his people to treat him that way and then decide to send his own son into that exact same environment. Foolish God. Foolish me. Because I am one of those who mistreats the prophets, who murders those who are sent to me. And we don't often get the stories of the prophets and how they felt about being sent. One of the ones that we do get is Jonah. And we know how Jonah felt about getting sent, but I don't think that's the model that we're supposed to follow. Anybody familiar with the story of Jonah? Yeah, okay. So I don't think Jonah is the model that we're meant to follow, but the stories of the prophets who would gladly lay on their side for hundreds of days in dirty underwear. You should really read the prophets, by the way, if you don't. There's all sorts of great stories in there that we don't normally talk about in church. Maybe you do. I don't know. We don't talk about a lot of those stories in church, but great stories in the prophets. These guys that are willing to subject themselves to humiliation among their people for the sake of delivering God's message. But we do know how the apostles felt about it. See, when Jesus said that I am sending you out, there's this transfer that happens. And in Acts chapter 5, when the apostles are being sent out and they're going and proclaiming God's message to the Jews in Jerusalem, the religious leaders, the very ones that Jesus is talking to here, the religious leaders don't like what the apostles are saying. They don't like that they continue to proclaim this Jesus after his death. And so they bring the apostles in and they say, you've got to stop teaching about this Jesus. And they imprison them, they get out of prison, and then they're back out teaching in the synagogues and in the temple, and then they call them back in and say, didn't we tell you not to teach? You've got to stop this. And then they're thinking about killing these guys, but one of the religious leaders says, don't worry about that, this will just filter out on its own if it's not from God, and if it is from God, we don't want to kick against it, and there's a lot of interesting story there. And so they decide, okay, instead of killing the apostles, here's what we'll do. We'll just beat them, we'll flog them, and then send them out telling them once again, don't teach in the name of Jesus. And Acts chapter 5, verse 41, tells us that the disciples rejoiced, that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for the sake of their Lord. As I'm grappling with this passage, me, an international missionary, real life missionary, as I'm grappling with this passage, what God is bringing to mind is, what would my life look like if instead of regarding God as foolish, I regarded him as gracious? What if I didn't think about these crazy plans of God who sends his disciples out to be murdered, to be treated shamefully? What if I didn't think of that God as foolish? But what if I thought of that God as gracious? And what would my life look like if, as a servant, so that's what we're supposed to be, right? As followers of Christ, we are meant to be servants. What if instead of thinking, poor servants, I thought, devoted? What if, like the apostles, it's not poor me, but it's grateful to expend my life for the will of my gracious God? See, we don't get to a point where we stop growing. We don't hit this point where we've got everything we're going to get from God, and we're done learning, and he's done sending, and we just get to coast it on out. I am humbled and honestly in some ways crushed by my own ignorance, by my own arrogance before God. And so my prayer for me, my prayer for you as well, is that we would be people who, in the face of what seems like foolishness, look at God and say, God, you are so gracious. And when asked to make sacrifices, and when asked to make changes, and when asked to encourage or to encounter difficult situations, we don't say, poor me or poor you, but we say, devoted. And I don't know what that looks like for you. Honestly, most of the time, I don't know what that looks like for me either. God allows us to see certain steps right in front of us, but rarely shows us the entire path. But I share that tonight because our story is one of obedience. And that's not meant to, it's not meant to lift us up. Right? My wife and I and our family, it's not meant to say like, oh, you should be like us. We had no idea the things that God was going to do in us, and every step of the way, he shows his abundant grace that should make it to where we don't ever question his wisdom or his graciousness, and yet sometimes we continually find ourselves asking, God, are you sure you know what you're doing? He sent a couple of very young kids off into the Sahara Desert to the country of Niger with our 1-year-old child to a place where we didn't know the language, didn't know anything about the place. And we just said, okay, God, well, if this is really where you're sending us, then we can do 2 years anywhere, right? The sort of minimum term at that point was 2 years. And we're like, we can do 2 years anywhere. So we head off to the desert to a people group that we know doesn't know Jesus. At that point, it was about 2.5 million people in that people group, and there were around 100 believers, right? 100 Christians out of 2.5 million people. This is an Islamic or Muslim people group, so very resistant to the gospel traditionally. There had been people telling them about Jesus for 50 years. In 50 years of work, around 100 believers. And so we head off to go save the world because that's obviously what God's going to do when he sends people out to people like that. And so we head out to save the world and head out into the desert, into places where you learn very interesting things. Like digital thermometers melt at 136 degrees. Just in case, in the shade, by the way. In the sun, they melt quicker, but in the shade, they melt at 136 degrees, just so you know. There is actually an entire alphabet of tropical diseases that you can get. Like, it actually runs the full gamut of the alphabet. All sorts of interesting things to learn. One of the biggest things we learned was that God's provision is rarely in stuff, and it's mostly in people. See, God helped us develop a love for the people that we were sent to, and as they became family and people began to follow Christ in our communities, God led us to ask for more time. And so we asked the International Mission Board, hey, can we stay longer? And they granted us to stay an extra year. And so we stayed a third year and a little bit longer. And we said, hey, can we keep staying? And they said no. And so we said, okay, what are we supposed to do? And our whole world fell apart because, you know, we don't trust God really, and we want to know everything that's supposed to happen to us. And God, we've been obedient here, and you've done some amazing things, so we're supposed to stay forever, right? And God completely shut that door. And some friends in a neighboring country said, hey, we've got a people group of 1.2 million, and there's only 12 believers. Why don't you come that way? Okay. And you're coming to join a great team. And we're like, great, we love having team, because when you're out in the bush all by yourself in that place where like it gets to 136 degrees, that's not always the most happy thing. God always provides, not always the most happy. So you're going to have a great team. Yes, we're going to have a great team. And it's on a plateau, and it actually gets cold sometimes. By cold, I mean like 60 degrees. It actually gets down to 60 degrees sometimes. And there's actually a waterfall in rainy season. And when you've been living out in the desert, the idea of a waterfall is amazing. And so we thought, yay, we're going to a place that has water and trees and 60 degrees sometimes, an amazing team. And then when we got there, our entire team left, and the electricity went off for 3 weeks straight. And the water went off because the electricity was off. And I don't know, you guys may have been without water and electricity for 3 weeks before. Anybody? Yeah? All right. Pleasant, right? No, and especially not pleasant when it's over 100 degrees. Right? Like some other people that were living in the area remarked, "It's never been this hot before here. You must have brought that with you." It's okay, thank you. And so we stayed there for 4 years. And before, in that other people group, we'd seen some people come to Christ, and that was amazing. And God had used us in some really neat ways. We'll talk about some of that in a minute. And then here we were for 4 years, ready to see more people come to Christ, because that's what God does when he sends stupid kids out into the middle of nowhere to tell people about Jesus, right? And nobody came to Christ through our personal ministry. But God provided some churches in the area, and we started pouring into those churches, and those churches started reaching out in their communities, and they were seeing people come to Christ. And we thought, oh man, this is awesome. Love doing this work. 4 years came to an end. It was time for another quick stateside in the U.S., and we're coming back and going, God, we can come back to the same place, right? And God says, no. And so we move again. And this time, God says, hey, how about, I know you love doing local ministry and all that. How about instead you try and help minister to like all of West Africa, which is an area a little bit larger than the continental United States. And so we get put into a facilitative role ministering across all of West Africa, and we do that for 3.5 years. And during that 3.5 years, we get 3 coups in a row and 2 terrorist attacks, friends killed in our city, bombings, that sort of thing. 1 friend kidnapped in a village just north of us who is still in captivity just over 7 years now. And the school's shut down because there's no security. And we can't trust our kids to be out. And this is in a capital city. We can't trust our kids to be out on the streets. And it gets to a point not coming against us because we're Christian, but white faces are not welcome in that area. And so it gets to where we can't go out. And so the IMB wisely, this isn't a bad thing, but says, hey, you can't do your job from here, so how about you move? And so we get to go to Senegal. And by the way, this is language and culture number 4 at this point, because every place we go speaks a different language, is a completely different culture, which is honestly not a lot of fun. No, first language, yes, lots of fun. Second language, still kind of fun. 3 and 4, not fun anymore. Just throwing that out there. I don't know. Some of you guys may speak like a lot of languages and think it's really awesome. Like my brain gets really full really quick, and by number 3, it just wasn't working that way anymore. Number 4, really bad. Anyway, so yay, we get language and culture number 4 and move to a completely new place. Because God knows. And you get this little heart thing of, why, God? Foolish God, poor servants. And God has to do a check in us. And COVID was a part of that. Sorry, everyone, by the way. COVID was because God needed to do a heart check on us, just so you know. Sorry. I'm, kidding, obviously, sort of, but God needed to do a heart check on us. Because sometimes we get so attached to the things that we think are our identity and our calling that it's no longer serving God, it's serving our idea of God or our idea of our ministry. And so God had to shake that up and remind us that our purpose was to serve him. Not to be viewed as like amazing missionaries, not to be viewed as saviors, but to serve him and to devote ourselves to him. The gracious God as devoted servants. One of the reasons why it was so easy for us to get tracked into that whole thing of, but God, our ministry is so great, is because we get to meet needs. What started as Baptist Global Response and is now Send Relief is all about meeting needs and changing lives. That's kind of our slogan. Meeting needs, changing lives. It's neat, right? Go ahead and say it. Meeting needs, changing lives. That was not very interactive. Let's try that one more time. Meeting needs, changing lives. It's neat, isn't it? Yeah. And so we get to do like medical clinics. We get to help build schools and do supplies for schools. We get to drill wells. We get to do food distributions. We were talking about aquaponics with Brother Sam. We get to do urban chickens, all sorts of great stuff. Pretty much whatever the communities need. We get to meet needs and we match that up, marry that with the proclamation of the gospel. We get to help churches thrive in these environments where the people can be hated because of their religion. And so working in ways that we see the impact immediately of the things that we're doing is a wonderful ministry. And doing that not only right around us, but helping other people do that. Helping church leaders across West Africa to have that kind of ministry in their environments. Helping other missionaries across West Africa have that kind of impact as terrorists have come in and refugee ministry has become a huge thing. Helping missionaries reach out to refugees, reach out to people groups that they had no access to before because they were way out in these red zones where we couldn't go. And now, through all of this unrest, God is bringing all of those people to us. And so having ministry among these peoples that we couldn't reach before, God is doing amazing things, and it's exciting to be a part of that. And you guys are a part of that. When you give to the cooperative program, when you give to Lottie Moon, if you've heard of the World Hunger Fund, like anybody remember like the little rice bowls or the bread loaves that you like put coins in way back in the day? They still do some of that stuff today. But World Hunger Fund, that stuff all still goes to make all of those kinds of ministries possible. The cooperative program is the base for all of this, and Lottie Moon is what allows missionaries like us and thousands of others like us to be around the world actually living in these places and doing this ministry. And then the giving to groups like Send Relief, which is Southern Baptist, the Southern Baptist arm of Community Development and Disaster Response. When you give to Send Relief or to the Global Hunger Fund, World Hunger Fund, that's what allows those ministries to happen and supports those ministries. You guys are a part of that. You're the ones making all of that happen. But sometimes we forget that what we're doing is being devoted servants to a gracious God and instead grab onto the things. And sometimes God has to shake us up a little bit to help us remember. God also used this passage in Mark recently, like over the last couple of weeks, to help shake me up again and remind me that I am to be a devoted servant to a gracious God and not somebody who thinks he knows it all, has it all under control, or has the ultimate plan. Hopefully, and we are going to have a time of question and answer, but hopefully God will also use situations in your lives, maybe even some of this tonight, to shake things up a little bit and remind you too that your highest aspiration is to be a devoted servant to a gracious God. May it ever be. Amen. So, little bit about us in ministry. we did want to give time to questions and answers. And Brother Terry, I think you're going to have a microphone, right, or somebody going to do microphone. If you do have a question, that way everybody can hear what your question is, and I'll do my best to answer relatively briefly so we can get lots of questions. I'm not great at relatively brief, by the way, just so you know. Brother Marty, you're going to cut us off when it's time, right? All right, yep, all right. All right, we'll throw out some easy ones. Grossest food, right? Grossest food. You guys know what Fruit Gushers gum is? Fruit Gushers gum? All right. Boiled caterpillars are much like Fruit Gushers gum. It's a little squishy on the outside, and then when you bite through the exterior, you have that burst of caterpillar guts in your mouth. Yeah, boiled caterpillars. Bad Fruit Gushers. Nobody needs caterpillar and dirt flavored Fruit Gushers, okay? Just don't. Yep, that's worst food. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How many of those alphabetical diseases did your family suffer through?
Really only about 7 or 8, but it's yeah, when you start with amoeba and just start going, anyway. When they tell you don't drink the water, there's reasons for that, okay? Like at least half of those live in the water or come from the water. Guinea worm, also really fun. We won't talk about guinea worm though. If you ever wondered what it's like to have a little what do you call it, a rotisserie set up on your body to pull worms out, guinea worm. Yep. All right.
What languages do you know?
All right. So fluent in English. I would say obviously, I don't know if it's that obvious. I do speak some English. Fluent in French and fluent in a language called Zarma. And then the other 2 languages that I'm not that great in, well, I guess 3 languages that I'm not that great in are Moray and Wolof and Jula.
During those events with the terrorist attacks and stuff, did y'all still try and preach during those events?
Yeah, so just one of those amazing God things, right? When the world is falling apart, it's not necessarily that people are looking for answers per se, but God has created us to have a wonder about the meaning of the world. And so when bad things happen, we question that. We question, what is the meaning of all of this? And so that produces a kind of natural openness to the things of God in those times. So a lot of our security concerns are not so much for us and our family. Our security concerns are for our national brothers and sisters who would be the actual targets of persecution in those times. So what we had to worry about wasn't so much us going out, although there were times for that, but instead making sure that we were not creating targets out of our national brothers and sisters who definitely were still going out. And one of just the amazing things that's happened there, specifically in that country, the entire country is red zone now. You can still fly into the capital city and stay in the capital city, but you're not supposed to go anywhere else. And there are still regular attacks in the capital city. When ISIS left Syria and Iraq, they came to West Africa, just so you know. So we get to play with them too, and Al-Qaeda and all sorts of fun. Not fun. The local church, when God drove out the missionaries, the local church stood up and said, it has to be on us. And so we have seen more amazing things happen in that country in the time since we left than we ever did while we were still there. And that is just one of the amazing works of God. And again, just one of those things, right? Like, God, how could you kick us out of the country we love? Foolish God, right? But when it's gracious God and devoted servant, you see God's economy at work, and you see the amazing way that he plans things out, put on full display. So the second place we lived is where our kids still call home. We have 4 kids. Our oldest, we're putting into university this year, so he started in the fall, and then 3 others that will follow along shortly. The second place we lived is really where they call home. They can't get there, like we just cannot go there. So occasionally we'll arrange meetings where we will gather groups of church leaders to safe areas, and then try and gather into those places. But there are a lot of our former ministry areas where we can't go anymore. So, yeah. It's weird to have your home taken away, though, you know? Yes, ma'am.
About your medical supply of how, is it easy to get, if you get sick, to get treatment? Or
That's one of those places where the IMB, being you guys and your giving, really take care of us. We have the best health care in the world. Like, IMB takes care of us super well and is willing to do what it takes to make sure that we are well. Some interesting stories just from us, but like a 6-hour drive down really bumpy roads when my wife's appendix was about to burst. Like, I don't know, anybody have appendicitis before, have your appendix taken out? Yeah, so you know that whole like, hey, tap on the bottom of your foot to see if it's really appendicitis. So like it's the night before and she's like, man, it's really hurting. I'm like, here, let me tap on your heel because that's what I heard I should do. So I tap on the heel and she smacks me, not really, just sort of. Not abusively, right? It's because I just caused her pain, so obviously she should cause me pain. Anyway, yes, it hurts, you know. So, okay, we're going to call ahead, and we're going to make sure. And when we called the hospital and said, okay, we're going to be there, like, early in the morning. We're going to leave it dark, and we're going to be there first thing in the morning. And they're like, well, it's a weekend, so the doctor won't be there. And we're like, we will pay, have the doctor there. And they're like, okay, well, I guess we could have the doctor there, but they're not going to have the people to do the ultrasounds or any of that stuff because it's the weekend. And we're like, we will pay, have the people there. And so we're on the road and we're like 4 hours into it and we're calling back again because 6-hour trip, right? So calling again, like, is the doctor there? They're like, well, it's the weekend. We will pay, have him there. And then is the ultrasound person there? Well, it's the weekend. We will pay, have him there. And they're like, are you sure? We are sure. And sure enough, they were there. They're like, okay, well, if you're going to pay. And they were there, and we got there, and it was like 20 minutes, and they're like, oh, yeah, her appendix is about to burst. We should probably do surgery. Good thing we have the surgeon and the person doing the ultrasound here. The IMB makes it, being you guys make it to where we can make those calls and go, we will pay, have him there. So thank you very much for that. My wife didn't die, and I appreciate that. Oh, the medical stories. Yes, sir.
you ever had short-term missionaries come and help out?
Quite a few, actually, throughout our term. So we've been with the IMB almost 18 years now. So this summer we'll make 18 years. And here's the biggest thing we learned. We use smaller teams usually, 2 to 4 people, and we make sure that we train translators. So we never expected translator training to be a big part of our ministry. By the way, anybody here speak English? Yeah? No, I don't see many hands. Now, I know it's Arkansas, but, you know, if you speak English, you can be used by God overseas. Translator training, and here's why that's super duper important. What we found with volunteers is when we create situations where you are able to use your gifts and your talents in the lives of the people around you, it impacts you and it impacts them in deep ways. And that sort of soul to soul, not just like life on life discipleship, but that soul to soul discipleship where you are being poured into by the people that you're ministering to and you are likewise pouring into them, that's where stuff really happens. And that doesn't happen if you can't communicate. And so we always want to create situations where that's what's happening, is you are able to pour into others of the gifts and talents that God has given you and receive from them as well. And so for that to happen, you got to have translators. So translator training has been a much bigger part of our ministry than we ever thought it would, and it can be part of how God uses you around the world, because almost everywhere requires translators. But that has facilitated teams coming out, and just one of those, it's just a gracious gift of God that some of the young people that we help train as translators have gone on into church ministry in their environments. And so having the opportunity to train song leaders and pastors and deacons of local churches around West Africa has just been, again, one of those extra little gifts of God that he just does because he is a loving and gracious God.
Out of curiosity, have many of the people that you brought to the Lord, have you actually turned any of the people that you brought to the Lord in your ministry into missionaries themselves?
Actually, so neat thing there. I'm thinking of how to phrase this appropriately. We have not had a situation where we brought someone to the Lord and then they ended up becoming a missionary. However, God has put us in places where we have been in the discipleship path of people. So like with our translators, we try and use translators from local churches. Right? So as these young people usually, because they're the ones that have time, right? Like if the adults are usually engaged in work and all of that, but the youth, which in West Africa, youth can be up to like 30 years old, by the way. So yeah, just different cultures. But the youth are the ones that have time. And so they would be the ones mostly doing the translation work for us and have the time to do the translator training programs that we would have. And so the local church is who was doing most of that initial bringing them to Christ. But as we were allowed a part of their discipleship process, then we have seen those go on to be missionaries. Actually, so one guy, just love him. He was saved long before we got to his area, right? And so he had a heart to reach out to others, and he was already doing that. The only part of that we got to play in this one guy's life is helping him see a different people group that he hadn't really seen before and recognize that he could cross a lot of different boundaries that he hadn't thought about crossing. So he was already very active as a missionary in his area among his people group, but seeing that he could cross boundaries, cross language barriers to go to other people groups, we kind of helped him see that. And again, this is one of those places where we can't go back to anymore, but he has free reign to still travel. And he's seen a bunch of people come to Christ recently among some people groups that we were helping to encourage. And so, yeah, seeing God call out intercultural missionaries as a part of, again, just one of those little glimpses of God saying, hey, with your obedience, I'm going to do stuff that you can't even imagine, and it's going to be so much more amazing than what you even think it can be. So we have seen some glimpses of that. It has not been like we were the instrumental ones in leading them to Christ and then on to missionary, but with those that were already engaged in church, then growing to that point of then being sent out and finding that calling from God. It's been neat to see that. And then even among other expats living in some of the cities where we've lived. In the last 2 cities where we've lived, we've been engaged in international churches in those areas, and God has put my wife and I both in leadership in those churches. And so one of the neat things at this last church, I came on and was an elder at the church before COVID, and when COVID hit, the pastor left, and I got asked to take on the the teaching pastor role or teaching elder role. And so kind of became the pastor of that church during that time. And one of the things that we set out from the start was, this is a real transient community. We never know how long people are going to be here or when they're going to leave. And so the best thing that we can do is train every person who comes through our doors to be a better church member and a better servant wherever they end up going. And so we just got really intentional about everybody needs to serve. And we want to train you up the best we can to serve the best that you can. And I had a small group of guys, 8 guys from 5 different nations that we were meeting together in leadership development. And one of the really neat things is 2 of those guys are pastors of international churches in other countries now. And so, again, it's just that thing of God just pouring his grace out and going, I'm going to give you little glimpses of amazing things that I can accomplish way beyond what you think. But the others coming into church leadership in different places, and they've all been moved around. I think only one of those guys, no, two of those guys are still in the place where we were meeting together, still in that city. Everybody else has gone on to other places, but they're serving as pastors and church leaders in those places. And so God's just giving us little bits of grace like that.
Share with us some of the cultural challenges that you've had that is kind of like oppose your Christian upbringing or training or what you expect.
Gotcha. All right. You want to volunteer for me? All right. Come on up here. All right. Stand here next to me. All right, hold out your hand. No, finger spread. Let's take a walk. This was unusual for me. All right, holding hands with dudes is not part of my Southern upbringing. The thing is, if you're walking around with a guy and just standing beside each other and not holding hands, it means there's actually a problem here. Like, for some reason, we're not friends like we should be. Because if we're friends, we're holding hands. If there's a problem, then we're walking around like this. Like, we'd still be walking right next to each other. But everybody would know that there's a big problem here, because if there wasn't a big problem, we'd be holding hands. That was a little weird. We won't do the laying across each other's legs. Like, when you're sitting in a circle, you lounge. You know, it's kind of like the disciples around the table, lounging. But you're lounging across the thigh of the guy next to you. I think that's another one my Southern upbringing didn't train me for. Go ahead. Thank you. And that's kind of a funny aspect of it, right? Of just little things that we get uncomfortable with. Like nursing, breastfeeding in church on the front row. Just, I don't know, like, when you're up front preaching and all the moms are sitting on the front row, like all the nursing moms are sitting on the front row, and like it's Africa, okay? Like, and it's not a shame thing. It's not a shame thing. It's just different cultures. And so when the baby wants to eat, you just boom and the baby eats. And it's hot. Like, remember we talked about 136 degrees, right? Like in the shade. And so it's hot and the baby gets sweaty and the baby's just like, oh. And, you're not going to try and cover up and tuck and all that real quick just because of the heat. So learning to preach, with that all right there. Again, my Southern church upbringing did not train me for that one either. Seminary did not prepare me for that. Okay, so yeah, those are, again, just focusing on kind of the funny things. But the biggest one, I would say the biggest and most meaningful one, was when I got to a point where I asked some of my friends, when we talk about a friend that's closer than a brother, what does that mean? Like, in your context, what does it mean to be a friend who's closer than a brother? And I was asking a number of different people, again, a number of different cultures, all in the same country at this point, but a number of different cultures there. And a consistent response that I got was, I can reach into your pocket and take whatever I want, and you will lovingly give it, and I will open my pocket to you in the same way. Now that sounds like it's all about money, right? And we get real uncomfortable with money, especially in the sense of like your neighbor coming and borrowing from you. It's like, you want to borrow some sugar? Fine. You know, you want to borrow $100? Not as fine, right? We get real uncomfortable with money. But money doesn't hold the same value in that context. Relationship is the highest currency. Money is just something. Time is far more valuable. Everything is far more valuable. And so we get real hung up on money. And when I stayed real hung up on money and the financial needs around me and you know, trying to like keep that barrier, it was barrier to relationship. And I didn't think about it that way because we don't think about it that way. But my relationship to my goods was a barrier to relationship with my African brothers and sisters. And learning that was hard. And after I knew it, knowing what to do with it was also difficult and still is difficult. It's not one of those things that's just like, ta-da, I've arrived. That was a barrier and a difficult one, and especially in church work where, hey, we need transport to go out to a village or something like that. Hey, you've got a car and you're the only one with a car, so obviously your car is for us to use, right? It's that way with you and your neighbors, right? Your car is for us. I don't usually think of my car as being for us, but my relationship with my material goods, and I didn't think I was that materialistic, you know? But my relationship with my material goods was a barrier to relationship and one that God had to really work on. I don't know, does that kind of answer the question? Okay, thanks. I saw that hand. You have your chance, man. You gonna take it? You only get one shot. Do not spit it. Okay, sorry. Oh, why screen? Those are the most fun. Okay, one more question.
What's the weirdest thing what's the most normal thing that's there, that happens there that's weird here?
Oh, it's a normal thing. Okay, like just, we've talked about things like the holding hands and eating bugs and all of that, right? So that's just kind of out there. We've been in West Africa for 18 years, right? So honestly, we feel a little weird here. So I don't really know how to answer that question well. This doesn't feel like home anymore. And I don't know how that sounds, right? We're still a little bit America, but we're a little bit of something else. And our something else isn't even just one culture. Our something else is 5 different cultures that we've tried to invest in deeply and to become as indigenous as we can, which we can't. Like there's this proverb that a lot of African cultures have that says, no matter how long a stick stays in the river, it doesn't become a crocodile, right? Love Proverbs, by the way, and biblical Proverbs as well, super useful. So if you're memorizing biblical Proverbs, way to go. They'll come in great when you're overseas. And I did say when. But different cultures have these different proverbs. And so everybody would love it when they're like, oh, you're so African. And I'm like, yeah, but no matter how long a stick stays in the river, it doesn't become a crocodile. And they're like, whoa, because it's like, oh, you really get it now. So, but we've been in the river a long time. Right? So I don't know what we are really. So I guess the weirdest thing that feels normal here is just doing life, like with the busyness, always needing to be somewhere, always being on the way somewhere, like that on this side feels really weird. So we'd rather just take our time and build community, but community seems to be hard to find on this side. Sorry. Yeah, so we're getting that. Tell you what, I'll hang out here afterward for a little bit, so if you got 2 more questions, you're welcome to come this way. She's motioning to you.
Make it fast, Mark. It's not going to be fast.
What is your birthday?
June 4th,
What's your wife's birthday?
June 25.
Okay, you know why I'm
And our son's birthday is June 30, our oldest.
okay, you know us WMU women have a magazine competitions.
Yes, ma'am.
And we all the WMU women on missionaries' birthdays pray for that.
And we appreciate it. It makes a difference. You know, we talk about pray, give, go, send. Right? I don't know if you guys have heard that, but when we talk about Southern Baptist involvement in missions, we lay it into that category. And it's pray, give, go, send. And that's what we do. And pray is always listed first. Not that it's an order of importance. It's not like giving is the second most important thing you do. But we always list prayer first because it is the most important. God uses our prayers both to move as well as to involve us in what he's doing. So when you pray, you're allowing God's Spirit to shape your hearts and your prayers to align with what he's doing around the world. It's bringing you into his will. And not only that, he uses your prayers to move. So, yeah, pray, please. I'm sorry? No, ma'am, because we are in facilitative positions now, then that sort of changed. Sometimes we miss it. Well, I'd say most of the time we miss it. But, yeah, God is very gracious to allow us to see such a large view of what he's doing around our region. And yeah, it is the loving act of a gracious God towards hopefully servants who are trying to be devoted. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Isn't
you.
that pretty interesting? Let's give him a round. That's it. He's gonna hang around.